Tony B is one of the most dangerous kinds of men in that world, not because he is the loudest, or the meanest, or the most visibly hungry, but because he is the one who genuinely tries to become someone else, and still cannot outrun what he used to be. When he comes back into the orbit of Tony S., he does not arrive like a typical soldier looking for a score. He arrives like a ghost that still has unfinished business, like a relative who knows too much about the past, and like a mirror that Tony S. cannot stand to look into for too long. To understand why Tony B ends up where he ends up, you have to start with what he represents to Tony S. On paper, he is family, a cousin, a shared bloodline, a shared set of old stories. But in practice, he is something heavier. He is one of the last people alive who can say, I knew you before all of this, before the house, before the title, before the fear in other people's eyes, before the compromises that turned you into who you are. That kind of connection is supposed to be comforting. In their world, it is often a threat because the past is not just nostalgia. The past is evidence. Tony B comes out of prison carrying two identities at the same time. One is the identity he wants, the clean one, the new one, the guy who did his time and is now trying to build something that cannot be taken away overnight. The other identity is the one that walks behind him like a shadow, the one everybody else sees even when they pretend not to. A connected guy does not just stop being connected because he wants to. The past is a brand, and the people around him treat it like it is permanent. What makes Tony B complicated is that he actually believes, at least for a while, that he can do it. He studies, he works, he tries to take pride in honest progress. That matters because most people in that life talk about going straight the way people talk about moving to another country, like a fantasy you bring up when you are tired. Tony B makes it real. He puts effort into it. He does not just want money, he wants a different kind of dignity, the kind that does not depend on fear or favors or luck. And that is exactly why he becomes such a problem. A man who never tries to change is predictable. A man who tries to change and fails, that man becomes volatile. He becomes emotional in ways the life cannot tolerate, because the life demands that you accept its logic. It demands that you stop asking for fairness. It demands that you make peace with the idea that some people win and some people lose, and that luck is part of the structure. Tony B cannot fully make peace with that, not deep down, not when he looks at the scoreboard and realizes what his absence did to his life. Because here is the part nobody can say out loud without it poisoning everything. Tony B did not just lose years. He lost the years where a man becomes established. He lost the years where connections deepen, where money stacks, where people start to treat you like an institution instead of a participant. While he was locked up, Tony S. grew into the center of gravity. Tony S. built a world that runs through him. And Tony B. comes back and sees that world already built, already occupied, already taken. Tony B. is not jealous in a childish way. He does not sit there counting another man's pockets like a cartoon. His jealousy is more intimate than that. It is grief disguised as irritation. It is the feeling of walking into a life that should have included you and realizing it went on without you. And it went on well. That does something to a man's pride, especially when he remembers the moment that separated their paths. The guilt between them is never clean. Tony S. carries his own version of it because he knows the story, he knows the night, he knows that a small twist of fate or a small choice changed who did time and who did not. Tony B. carries his version too, because even if he does not say it directly, even if he tries to be the bigger man, he cannot completely stop himself from feeling like life picked the wrong person to punish. That feeling does not need to be rational. It just needs to be there, sitting quietly underneath everything, turning normal conversations into loaded ones. So when Tony B. looks at Tony S., he is looking at more than a cousin. He is looking at the life he might have had. He is looking at the comfort he missed. He is looking at the respect that now comes automatically to Tony S., while he has to earn his place all over again. And the worst part is that Tony S. wants to help him, but the way Tony S. helps people is rarely pure. Tony S. helps in ways that keep the other person attached. He gives you opportunities that come with invisible strings. He supports you, but he also owns part of you afterward. Tony B. can feel that. He is smart enough to feel that. He is sharp, he reads rooms fast, he understands the emotional economy of the crew. He knows when someone is being kind and when someone is managing you. That is why his relationship with Tony S. is never simple warmth. It is warmth mixed with pressure. It is appreciation mixed with old resentment. It is loyalty mixed with the fear of becoming a dependent. And Tony B., as a person, has this strange mix of qualities that makes him stand out in that world. He can be charming, he can be funny, he can be the guy who makes the room lighter. But he also has this tightness in him, like he is always holding something back. He is not the loud animal type. He is not the guy whose violence is obvious from a mile away. His violence sits behind his eyes. It feels like it is waiting for a reason. That matters because violence in their world is not just about muscle. It is about justification. The most dangerous guys are the ones who can convince themselves they are right. Tony B is capable of building a story in his head where what he is doing is fair, where he is correcting the universe, where he is getting back what was taken. Once that story takes hold, the actions that follow can be extreme because they no longer feel like crimes to him. They feel like balance. At first, the straight path is not just about money. It is about control. In prison, you live inside other people's rules. You are told when to move, when to eat, when to sleep, who you can speak to, how you can exist. When you come out, the biggest craving is not luxury. It is ownership of your own time. Tony B chasing a legitimate career is him trying to own himself again. There is also something else. The life he left behind is a life where your name is always tied to suspicion. Even if you are not doing anything that day, people assume you are. Even if you are trying to be calm, the world expects you to be dangerous. Going straight is Tony B trying to be seen differently, not just by strangers, but by himself. But the problem with going straight is that it is slow, and it is humiliating in a very specific way. In the criminal world, you can have nothing and still feel like somebody, because your reputation fills the space money has not filled yet. In the straight world, nobody cares who you were. Nobody cares what you survived. Nobody cares what you can do in a fight or what kind of fear your name used to generate. They care about resumes, licenses, punctuality, and whether you can smile without looking like you want to break something. Tony B tries to do that, but every day he is reminded that he is starting from behind. The hours are long, the respect is low, the money is embarrassing compared to what he knows exists right next to him. And it is not just the money, it is the contrast. He can spend a whole day grinding, doing everything right, and still feel like he is barely moving. Then he can look at the other side of the street, the side Tony S lives on, and see a different kind of life. A life where money appears quickly, where problems get solved by one phone call, where the world bends around you because people are afraid not to cooperate. That contrast is poison. It makes the honest path feel like punishment, and it makes the criminal path feel like freedom, even though it is the opposite. Tony B wants to leave the life because he understands, on some level, that the life is a cage. But he wants to come back because the cage is familiar and because it offers him the one thing he misses most, immediate power. Power is not just control over others. It is the feeling that your time matters. In the straight world, Tony B is a number. In the mob world, he is a known quantity, a man with a history, a man with a reputation, a man whose presence changes how people behave. That is addictive, especially after years of being reduced to a prisoner. Then you add in the emotional pressure of trying to rebuild a family life, trying to look like a new man while still carrying the instincts of the old one. He wants to provide. He wants to feel proud. He wants to walk into his house without feeling like he is being judged by silence. And when a man wants to provide but cannot do it fast enough, and he knows a faster path exists, temptation stops looking like temptation. It starts looking like responsibility. This is where Tony S becomes both a support system and a trigger. Tony S wants Tony B to succeed, partly because he loves him, and partly because Tony S does not want the guilt to keep living. If Tony B builds a good life, then the past feels less cruel. But Tony S also cannot help being Tony S. He offers help in ways that keep Tony B close to the life. He is around the crew. He is around old jokes, old talk, old energy. Every time Tony B is near it, the old identity wakes up. And when the old identity wakes up, it does not wake up gently. It wakes up with hunger because it remembers what it used to be. It remembers being respected. It remembers being feared. It remembers being included. And it remembers that he paid a price that other people did not pay. So why did Tony B want to leave the life in the first place? Because he saw the ending. He saw how the life treats men when they get older, how it does not give them retirement, how it replaces them, how it punishes weakness, how it demands constant performance. He saw how the life infects everything, family, friendships, even your ability to relax in your own living room. Prison probably made that clearer. Prison is where you meet the future versions of yourself, men who thought they were in control until they were not. It is where you learn that loyalty has limits and the world keeps spinning without you. He wanted out because he wanted something that could not be confiscated with one indictment, something that would not disappear the moment a friendship turns into a rivalry. He wanted a clean identity. He wanted to be able to look at himself without always making excuses. He wanted to stop being a man whose best skill is surviving chaos. But why did he want to come back? Because the straight world did not reward him for suffering. It did not give him credit for surviving prison. It did not care that he was trying. It just measured him against everybody else, and he was behind. And he could not stand being behind, not while watching Tony S. live as if the universe itself makes exceptions for him. There is also the issue of pride. In their world, pride is not a personality trait, it is a survival tool. If you look weak, people test you. If you look uncertain, people exploit you. Tony B trying to go straight is brave in one sense, but it also puts him in a position where he feels exposed. The straight path demands patience. Patience feels like submission to a man like him, especially when he has spent years being forced to submit to rules. So he drifts back toward what he knows. Not because he is incapable of honest work, but because he is emotionally incapable of being small. That is the real problem. In his head, he is still a man who belongs in the center of things. And when life puts him on the edge, he starts trying to force his way back in. Now, his involvement with New York is where everything becomes irreversible, and it is not just because Tony S. warned him. It is because Tony S. warned him for a reason, and Tony B. understood the reason. New York is not like dealing with random local problems. New York is heavy. New York has long memory and deeper ego. New York operates with a level of consequence that smaller crews often underestimate. Tony S. telling Tony B. to stay away is Tony S. trying to keep the peace, trying to keep family safe, trying to keep a manageable conflict from becoming a war. Tony B. ignores that, and the question is why? The simple answer is money and opportunity. New York offers bigger scores, bigger connections, and a faster route back to importance. But the real answer is more personal. Tony B. gets pulled into New York because it offers him a role that feels meaningful, and because it lets him act out his resentment without admitting that resentment exists. When he connects with people on the New York side, he is not just looking for a paycheck. He is looking for validation that he still matters. He is looking for a place where his past is not a problem, but a credential. And he is also looking for a way to feel like he is choosing his own path, instead of living under Tony S.'s shadow. This is the part that cuts deepest. Tony S. loves him, but Tony S. also naturally becomes the boss of every room he walks into. He cannot turn it off. He manages people, he directs energy, he decides outcomes. For Tony B, being close to Tony S can feel like being permanently younger, permanently secondary. Even if Tony S tries to treat him like an equal, the world does not. The crew does not. The structure does not. Tony S is the gravity, everybody else orbits. So when New York offers Tony B attention, it feels like escape. It feels like a space where he is not just Tony S's cousin, not just the guy who came home late, not just a project everybody's watching to see if he fails. It feels like he can be a player again. And in that world, being a player is not just about money. It is about respect, and respect is the drug that never stops working. There is also loyalty, but a twisted kind. Tony B forms bonds with certain people, and those bonds become emotional leverage. When you have been locked up, connection hits differently. The people who showed you kindness, who treated you like you still existed, who made you feel like you were not just forgotten time, they can become anchors in your mind. If Tony B feels he owes someone, or if he feels someone represents the life he missed, he can become reckless out of that loyalty. And reckless loyalty is one of the most dangerous forces in their world, because it makes you act without calculating how many other people will pay. It makes you focus on the immediate emotional problem, not the larger political reality. Tony S is political by nature. Tony S thinks in terms of ecosystems, balance, consequences, optics. Tony B is emotional in a way Tony S has trained himself not to be, or at least not to show. That difference becomes fatal when Tony B decides to make moves that touch New York directly. Because once you touch New York in that way, you are not just committing an act, you are declaring a message. You are telling them you are willing to disrupt their order. You are embarrassing them. You are forcing them to respond, because if they do not respond, they look weak, and weakness in that world spreads like disease. Tony S tells him not to get involved because Tony S understands that the moment you cross that line, it stops being about the original issue and becomes about reputation. New York cannot let something like that sit. They have to come back, not because they enjoy it, but because they have to maintain the image that nobody can touch them without consequences. Tony B still does it, and the reason is that he is trying to solve an internal problem with an external act. The internal problem is that he feels powerless in his own story. He feels like time stole his best years. He feels like Tony S got to live the life he was supposed to share. He feels like he is always catching up. He feels like he is being watched, judged, managed. So he does something big. He does something irreversible. Because irreversible acts make you feel powerful. They make you feel like you are no longer waiting for life to happen to you. You are happening to life. But there is another layer, and it is the way Tony B feels about Tony S specifically. He cares about him, but he also resents him. He admires him, but he also wants to challenge him. He appreciates his help, but he also hates needing it. And most importantly, he cannot fully accept that Tony S is the boss, because in Tony B's head, they are cousins who grew up together, equals in spirit, two guys who came from the same place. Prison changed Tony B's life, but it did not change his internal ranking of himself. He still sees himself as someone who should have a say. So when Tony S tells him no, it hits him differently than if another person told him no. It does not just feel like advice. It feels like authority. It feels like Tony S placing him back into a smaller role. And for a man like Tony B, that can spark rebellion even if rebellion is irrational. This is how you get the tragedy of it. Tony S is not telling him no out of cruelty. Tony S is telling him no because he understands the danger. But Tony B hears it as control. He hears it as condescension. He hears it as the same old story. Tony S on top, Tony B expected to behave. And then Tony B makes the kind of decision that only makes sense if you understand the psychology of a man who feels behind. He goes toward the thing he was told to avoid, because if he can pull it off, it proves something. It proves he is still capable. It proves he still belongs. It proves he is not just a rehabilitated ex-con trying to be normal. The irony is that Tony B's desire to leave the life and his desire to return to it are the same desire, just expressed differently. Both are about control. Going straight is him trying to control his future in a legitimate way. Going back is him trying to control his present in an immediate way. The straight path is long control. The criminal path is short control. When long control feels impossible, men like him reach for short control even if it burns everything down. And it burns everything down because Tony B is not just making choices for himself anymore. His choices become Tony S's problem because of family, because of reputation, because of the way alliances work. In that world, you do not get to say that was him, not me. When the person who did it shares your blood and your banner, everything spreads upward. Everything becomes the boss's responsibility, even when the boss warned against it. This is where Tony B becomes a test for Tony S, not just emotionally but structurally. Tony S is forced to choose between family loyalty and political survival. If he protects Tony B too much, he risks war. If he gives Tony B up too easily, he destroys the image that he protects his own. He also destroys something inside himself, because that is his cousin, and because the guilt that started this whole dynamic will come roaring back if the ending is cruel. Tony B does not fully understand how trapped Tony S is by this. Or maybe he understands it and still acts, because part of him wants to force Tony S into pain. That is the ugliest possibility, and it is not impossible. Sometimes resentment is not just passive bitterness. Sometimes it becomes sabotage. Not always conscious sabotage, but the kind where you keep making choices that put pressure on the person you resent until they finally crack. Even if Tony B is not consciously trying to hurt Tony S, his actions do it anyway. Because Tony S's power is built on stability, on managing multiple threats at once, on keeping the larger machine from turning against him. Tony B drags chaos into that machine. He creates a situation where Tony S cannot simply negotiate his way out. He creates a situation where pride on the New York side demands blood, and where Tony S's usual tricks stop working. That is also why Tony B gets involved with New York even after being warned, because he underestimates how personal it is on their side. In his mind, it might still feel like business, like a move, like an exchange of favors. But for men like Phil, respect is not abstract. It is physical. If you touch their family, if you embarrass them, it is not something you settle with a meeting and a handshake. It becomes a stain they believe must be cleaned with violence. Tony B is smart, but he is not experienced in that particular political terrain, not the way Tony S is. Tony S has spent years dealing with New York's mood swings, their internal power fights, their pride, the way they interpret every event as a message. Tony B has been away, and in his absence, those relationships have hardened. The stakes got higher. The rules got less forgiving. Tony B walks back into a world that moved forward without him, and he tries to play it like it is still the old days. That mismatch is lethal. So who was Tony B to Tony S? He was blood, but also a wound. He was the cousin who carried a shared past, and also the cousin who carried a shared guilt. He was a reminder that Tony S's life could have gone differently, that the boss image is partly built on luck. He was also a temptation, because Tony S wanted to be generous to him, wanted to fix something, wanted to prove to himself that he can take care of family without destroying them. And who was Tony B himself? He was a man trying to be reborn, but still addicted to the old identity. He was a man capable of real effort, real change, real ambition, but also a man whose pride could not tolerate slow progress. He was a man who wanted to be good, but wanted to be powerful more than he wanted to be good, and when those two desires collided, power won. How did he feel about Tony S? He loved him, but he was also haunted by him. He could laugh with him, but he was also measuring himself against him. He could accept help from him, but he also hated that he needed it. He could respect his intelligence, but he also resisted his authority. It is not one emotion. It is a pile of emotions that never fully separate. And that is why every decision Tony B makes around Tony S carries extra weight. Why did he want to leave the life? Because he saw it as a dead end. Because prison gave him the perspective to understand that the life does not love you back. Because he wanted a future that did not depend on constant conflict. Because he wanted his hands clean in a way that money cannot buy. Because he wanted to stop living as a walking indictment. Why did he want to come back? Because he could not accept being ordinary. Because the straight path made him feel small. Because he felt behind, and he needed a shortcut to catch up. Because the presence of Tony S. and the crew kept reactivating his old identity. Because resentment and pride kept whispering that he deserved more than slow improvement, he deserved immediate respect. And why did he get involved with New York when he was told not to? Because New York offered him significance. Because he wanted to prove he could still move like a serious guy. Because he wanted independence from Tony S.'s orbit. Because loyalty and personal bonds pulled him into conflicts that were bigger than him. Because the act of disobeying Tony S. felt like reclaiming control. And because, once he started, he could not stop himself from escalating, since escalation is what men do when they feel like life has been ignoring them. Tony B is not just a cautionary character about crime. He is a cautionary character about time. About what happens when you lose years and come back expecting the world to wait for you. About what happens when you try to change, but you still crave the identity you used to have. About what happens when family love is mixed with guilt and rivalry, and nobody can separate it cleanly. In the end, Tony B's story is the story of a man who wanted to be free, but did not know which prison he was running from. He runs from the obvious prison, the cell, the system, the humiliation of being controlled. He tries to build a new self, but the other prison is internal, the prison of pride, the prison of comparison, the prison of needing to feel like you matter right now, not 5 years from now. That prison is quieter, but it is stronger because you carry it everywhere. And Tony S., for all his power, cannot save him from that. Tony S. can offer money, protection, guidance. He can warn him. He can try to steer him. But Tony S. cannot rewrite the years Tony B. lost. He cannot remove the bitterness that grew in that absence. He cannot make the straight world treat Tony B. like a man with history instead of a man with a record. He cannot give Tony B. the one thing Tony B. truly wants, which is the feeling that the universe did not cheat him. So Tony B. does what men like him do when they feel cheated. He takes. He strikes. He forces a moment that cannot be ignored. And the tragedy is that this moment, the one that makes him feel powerful again, is also the moment that seals his fate and drags everyone else into consequences they never asked for. That is why Tony B. hits so hard as a character. He is not a stranger who wanders in and causes chaos for no reason. He is family. He is history. He is unfinished guilt walking back into the present. He is the proof that in that world, the past does not stay in the past. It collects interest. And sooner or later, somebody pays.